Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where the Sony and Marvel relationship continues to get more and more incestuous. Yes, it was announced yesterday that the Russo Brothers have signed a multi-year deal with Sony. What? Aren't they supposed to be tied up with Disney for the foreseeable future? Well, let's dig in. The deal with Sony itself is for 3 years, and it begins in April. So that'll take them all the way through April 2018. And it's a first look deal, and what first look means is that Sony doesn't have to produce their films, but the Russo brothers have to give them like first dibs. So if the Russo brothers come up with an amazing idea in exchange for Sony paying their expenses for their production company, that's often includes the salary of maybe some employees, an office on the Sony lot, etc. To Xerox and all those little tiny expenses, they have to go to Sony first and say, do you want to produce and distribute this idea that we have? And Sony can say yay or nay. And if they say nay, then they can shop it around to other studios. That's how you have filmmakers like Jerry Bruckheimer, who for so long has had a relationship with Disney, still occasionally producing films for other studios. Because if it's not with Disney, then Disney said no. So the Russo brothers are setting up shop at Sony, which is interesting indeed, considering that they are definitely set up at Marvel for Captain America 3 Civil War, but then there has been a lot of discussion about them taking over, of course, Avengers Infinity War. That's Avengers 3 with 2 installments in 2018 and then again in 2019. Basically going the route of The Hobbit, where the films come out a year apart on basically the same day, the first weekend of May. So how can they do that if they're going to be literally in the middle of a deal with Sony, right? Well, one of the things they could potentially do is just have this be a producing deal. They would only produce movies through Sony, hire somebody else to direct them, and really be the idea men there, and give their expertise while they stay in business with Marvel. For all intents and purposes, Sony and Marvel would be sharing these filmmakers. Very interesting that Disney Marvel Studios would be cool with that, right? If they're going to spend so much time developing this talent and promoting their films and really building them as a brand name, as a directing duo, you'd think they'd want to benefit directly. So that leads to the next possible consideration, and that's that, and this is something many people thought might be the case when the deal was announced, that perhaps the Russo brothers would be the ones to take over Spider-Man. And that to some degree makes sense. Their names were bandied about during the Sony hack and the leaked emails, but only a producing capacity at that point. That, of course, is now going to go to Amy Pascal and Kevin Feige, so maybe they could come on now as directors. But then also don't forget that they are dealing with Spider-Man in their Civil War movie. So they're already going to have experience handling Spider-Man. So when you think of that, they also become a really interesting and somewhat obvious choice to take over the solo Spider-Man movie, which is set to theaters in 2017. We just talked about Drew Goddard yesterday potentially taking it over, and these are 2 very, very good choices. Maybe the Russo brothers will just produce, but that seems like a lot of creative cooks in the kitchen with a lot of creative firepower. Why have them all fire in the same direction, right? If you're going to have such a expansive universe, you want multiple projects going at the same time that have multiple equally talented people at the helm. Now the other crazy idea, and this is something you might recall was a rumor when the Sony-Marvel deal first took place about Spider-Man, and that's that Disney was positioning itself to potentially purchase Sony Pictures, to acquire them. And I think that isn't totally outside the realm of, possibly happening. It's not that ridiculous, because when you think about it, the other day I was thinking about how all the other studios are doing so well. I was like, wow, Warner Brothers has such an amazing slate, Fox, Disney, of course, and then you think about Sony and you're like, wow, they really are trying to recover from the hack, and it really did decimate them to some degree. And maybe the Disney execs see that, so they're like, hey, Russo brothers, why don't you go be like an advanced party, go settle in there, let's infest Sony, and then, we'll turn to them one day and say, so many of our talent is there, and we're so responsible largely for the success of your studio, why not sell it to us? So it'll be interesting to see if the Disney empire does indeed have these nefarious, secretive plans to get even bigger. Although I think considering how well they're doing with their properties, people aren't that opposed to being bought by Disney these days. So it's a very interesting development indeed. So I'm curious to what you guys think. Do you think it's good that Sony and Marvel continue to mix like this? What do you think it's a sign of? Do you think it's all just about Spider-Man and they're positioning everybody to best benefit that character that they're going to now share? Do you think it is the advanced, the very beginning steps of perhaps a purchase of Disney, of Sony? It's just a really interesting development. And I think at the end of the day, also, let's just say right now, congratulations to the Russo brothers. They basically came out of nowhere doing, very small films, I believe a couple episodes of Community, and then now they did The Winter Soldier. They nailed it, and they're getting a just reward. So it's good to see that there is justice in Hollywood, at least sometimes. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day is very interesting, and it has to do with that Power Rangers short. And we discussed this last week. I said, was this the end of fan fiction? And a number of you defended Joseph Kahn and his right to make a Power Rangers short, to make this fan fiction, and to show how he felt the property should be treated. Now, Saban, of course, didn't agree, but they worked things out. Well, no sooner have they worked things out than the producer of that short, I have his name here, Adi Shankar, came out with his own version, his own animated version of a James Bond movie, which he put up on YouTube. It was called James Bond in Service of Nothing, and it used Sean Connery's likeness to basically tell its own James Bond adventure. Now, of course, within 12 hours, or even less than that, MGM shut it down on YouTube. Andy Shankar said in this case that he wasn't going to pursue it. He had great respect for MGM and the James Bond character, so he was just going to let the whole thing go. But I'm very curious about what you guys think of this, and I think it continues the discussion. And I'm sure people who make fan films wish this guy would stop it because, he's really, poking a sleeping giant with a stick here, and that fan films have largely been able to go, unchecked until now. But as I argued when the Power Rangers one came out, there's a difference here. And I think that, some people said this was from a love of Power Rangers. And maybe it was for Joseph Kahn, but clearly not for Adi Shankar. Because if you looked at the way he titled his James Bond short, he said, James Bond in Service of Nothing, and then he put in parentheses, bootleg universe. So this was clearly an attempt to establish his own brand. This fan film brand that takes fan favorite properties and has fun with them. And for the purpose, not just of having fun with them, but clearly, again, to build a brand. I think where he really messed up was putting that bootleg universe tag on it. Because, universe building is very big right now. Everyone talks about cinematic universes. And clearly this guy was like, hey, I'm going to make my own, and I'm going to have the power of the fans behind me. Now, why doesn't this count as a parody? The reason it doesn't count as a parody, because, you look at sites like How It Should Have Ended, and they use the likeness of characters all the time. And, I think there was probably some humorous elements to this James Bond short that he did. Some people said it was like Archer. But Archer, of course, is not called James Bond. It's called Archer, which allows him to get away with considerably more. Also, it's a send-up of the spoof genre in general, and it takes from James Bond, of course, but many other places as well. Even Get Smart to some degree. Archer has that general spy look. And it's become quite unique in its own right. So anyway, the thing is that also, when you do a parody, you're commenting on things that have already taken place. How It Should Have Ended makes fun of a film that has already been made. But what this guy's doing, Andy Shankar, with his Power Rangers and his James Bond shorts, is that he's continuing the story. He's telling a fresh, original story. And, you don't want anyone to think that's canon if you own the brand, and you don't want anyone to think that that's also where the direction the brand is going in. Especially because, this guy doesn't have the same financial investment. I mean, forget an emotional investment. He's not financially invested in the future of the property, right? If he messes it up or does something that makes people feel differently about it, what does that what does he care? He just moves on to the next property. So I continue to believe that I think this is not appropriate. I think that people should protect their brands, and I think that parody is, that's fun. That's where you can promote something and get the idea out there. Epic rap battles also is an element of parody, and those things I think are really great. And they also expand the character, his appeal. But I think you can't expand the character's story, and that's where that's where the line's starting to get blurred, and that's where people are making a mistake. So I'm really curious, for those of you who defended these filmmakers with the Power Rangers, do you think that the James Bond thing is a step too far? Or do you think these guys totally chickened out, they should have stuck to their guns, and you want to see the bootleg universe rise? And also, do you think that another line to be drawn is whether or not it's a professional endeavor? If someone is hiring professional actors and looking for those kind of professional level viewership, and also is trying to, get their own calling card to get their own work in the industry, perhaps. I just think it's a big disregard for all the work that goes into handling these properties, acquiring them, hiring teams to make sure they're well handled. Now, some people might counter, you're not doing your job. The properties aren't well handled, but I don't think this is the way to go about it. I think the way to go about it is to change just enough so that it's a commentary on it, and then you say, oh, hey, look, this has become even more popular. You know what a great example of that is? Kingsman: The Secret Service. Matthew Vaughn and Mark Miller said, you know what? I don't like the way the James Bond franchise is evolving, so I'm going to do a commentary on that. Literally, it's a commentary with, this isn't that kind of movie, but I'm going to create new characters, a new setting, and I think that Kingsman: The Secret Service is incredibly successful in being a commentary on what happened to the Bond franchise, what made it great, where potentially it's gone wrong now, but then also created something new that we can all enjoy on its own. And everybody now wants to see a sequel. And I think to some degree, I think it's really a warning shot across the bow of Bond and could become a genuine competitor for it going forward. And it's all perfectly legal, because they changed the names, etc. So that's the way to do it, and do it quite well, and in a professional manner. All right, so the third story of the day, talk about, the old guard versus the new guard. Netflix is also being kind of seen, I think, these days as an Andy Shankar. Now, of course, as it was announced on Monday, Netflix purchased the distribution rights for Beasts of No Nation. This is a hotly anticipated film. It's the next film from Cary Fukunaga. He's the filmmaker who did Jane Eyre, but then, of course, also did True Detective. He didn't do the writing, but he was a collaborative partner there with Nick Pizzolatto, and Cary Fukunaga directed all of the installments, and I think it really did a lot for him, as a talent in Hollywood, putting him on people's radar. I believe he even won an Emmy for the series. So he made this film called Beasts of No Nation, and it stars Idris Elba, another talent that a lot of people really want to see succeed in Hollywood. He plays an African warlord, and the film explores how he inducts child soldiers into his regime, and how he takes them from their homes, and what becomes of them psychologically. It's going to explore that. Now, when they first reported this project, I said, watch out, Idris Elba, that child actor could seriously overshadow you, considering they're going to show that psychological journey. But we'll see. He could be doing a Forrest Whitaker in The Last King of Scotland, where, of course, it was supposed to follow James McAvoy, but yet the enigmatic character that Whitaker played earned him the Oscar. So they put the film out for bidding to get a distributor. This will play into the viewer question, by the way, today as well. But they put it out there for a distributor, and Fox Searchlight wanted it, and Focus Features wanted it. And those are two incredibly aggressive and successful distributors when it comes to award season. And clearly, Beasts of No Nation wants to be an award season contender. But they got into bed with a strange bedfellow, because Netflix outbid everybody and won the rights. They paid $12 million to distribute the film. That's a huge number. Netflix has money to burn. We don't quite know the numbers, the viewership that they have for their shows, because they don't release it, but we do know that they're doing very well in terms of membership and providing, of course, content for their customers. Now, it's important to remember, just on a side note here, that this is a monster created by the studios. As streaming became more popular, they pulled and began to pull their properties from Netflix and said, well, we're going to distribute them ourselves digitally. So Netflix saw the writing on the wall and said, if we don't start creating original content, we're going to have nothing to give to our customers. So that's where this whole thing came out of largely, and why they've become so aggressive in the TV space, and now, of course, they're trying to move into film. So Netflix says, we're going to pay $12 million for this. Beasts of No Nation took the deal. Now they're trying to defend it, but I think that they have a rough road ahead of them. I have to say, Idris Elba just can't catch a break. Every time he makes a movie, something happens to sideline it. The Long Walk to Freedom came after 12 Years a Slave, so no one really paid attention to it. He was fantastic in that movie. Now he's in the middle of some weird Netflix versus the movie theater fight. And let's see if Netflix can make a successful awards bid. That's the first big question here. Can Netflix have a serious awards contender that is a film? I don't think the talent here is strong enough with Fukunaga and Idris Elba. I feel that these guys are name talent, but right now largely in television. I think they haven't really transitioned over into movies. It's not like this film stars Daniel Day-Lewis, and so I think the Academy still has an out to kind of ignore this. So that's, very scary. I think they could probably do a little better at the Golden Globes, considering they've already struck up a relationship with the Hollywood Foreign Press Association for the television section of the Golden Globes, but we'll see. So they're going to try and launch a successful awards campaign for this. Now, if you want to be considered for awards, if you're a film, you must play in theaters, even if it's just, though, in a limited release. So Netflix has said, this film, we're going to release it day and date on our platform, obviously, but also in a few select theaters across the country. And then you can decide how you want to experience Beasts of No Nation. Now, as we've been saying many a time here on the show, unless movie theaters start, cleaning up their act literally in terms of the theaters being clean and people not talking on the phone, I think a number of people, especially for a film like this, which doesn't have, really high special effects and has largely television talent, of course you're going to want to watch that at home on Netflix, on your big screen TV, in the comfort of your home. It starts whenever you want it to. You can take a break and you can get whatever snack you want. You can invite over anybody you want. And most of all, of course, it's free with your Netflix membership. But Netflix is saying they're trying to put a happy face on this and saying, oh no, we're not competing with theaters, we're just offering a choice. Well, the movie theaters don't see it that way. And they, the biggest chains in the country, AMC, Regal, Cinemark, and Carmike, have said they will not play Beasts of No Nation. So that really leaves the independent theaters and Alamo Drafthouse, basically whoever was willing to play The Interview when they had the whole problem with the Sony hack. So this is very similar to what happened with Netflix and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon 2, the sequel that they're making with the Weinstein Company, and IMAX is partnered there. And the idea was, it's going to be available on our platform, on Netflix, but then also if you want to see it on an IMAX screen, you'll be able to go and see it in IMAX. Now, of course, Harvey Weinstein said he was quite surprised that IMAX hadn't secured their own theaters, because quickly, of course, all the theater chains said not on our IMAX screens. So you have a situation where there are a few independent IMAX screens across the country, and that's basically the only place you're going to be able to see it. Now, I can understand why the theaters are nervous, but I said it, they have no one to blame but themselves. It isn't really a choice between what size screen you want to watch it on. I think it's like how much you want to have to suffer through a bad experience and how much you're willing to gamble that maybe no one will talk during this showing, maybe no one will be on their phone, maybe I can get a good seat. I think that that's all the different factors that are at play. And I think if you give people an out from having to deal with that, and it's not for like a big comic book movie, although I feel even some of the smaller comic book films would potentially benefit from an on-demand or Netflix release. They're going to go the home route. But I'm curious to know how you guys feel. Where would you watch, or where will you watch at this point, Beasts of No Nation? Will you watch it on Netflix at home? Will you find out one of these search out one of these independent theaters to see it on the big screen? And also, if it was playing at the bigger chains, would you go and see it? Have the theater chains successfully kept you from seeing the film in theaters? But if so, aren't they just driving more people to watch on Netflix? It's a very weird situation. But I think the real gauge of success here will be twofold. One, is Beasts of No Nation a serious awards contender? Does it get the nominations it needs to get? So far, so good with Netflix on TV, but Netflix already takes place on TV. I think this is a far more contentious situation, and I think Hollywood's going to put up more of a fight. So expect, especially the Academy, to push back very hard against this Netflix initiative. And then the other qualification for success is if it's able to, I don't know how they're going to gauge it, but if it's able to pull in some way as much money, because of course you don't pay to watch it on Netflix, it's just in subscribership they're going to gauge it. Does it get as many viewers and as much money as it would if it had been released theatrically? I think those are the two big questions that everyone's going to be paying attention to, and of course what Netflix will either divulge with great pride or try to hide if they can't do any of those things statistically. So that's the third story of the day, and I do believe we're getting closer and closer to a day-and-date release situation where you can see a movie at home or at the theater, and I feel, I have mixed emotions about that, but I really think whatever it takes to give movie theaters a kick in the pants to finally provide a better movie-going experience for us. Everyone abroad, I envy you because you tell of such wonderful movie-going experiences, but I can say that here in the United States, it's really problematic. And that could also factor into yesterday's story about China finally grossing more than the U.S., just 10 million, but still, and that's because they probably have nicer theaters over there. All right, so now on to the viewer question, which, as I said, ties in today to what we've been discussing a little bit, and that's distributors. So Dan Miller says, "Hello, Grace, I have a question. What do film distributors really do? A film is produced by a studio, but then someone else will often distribute it on their behalf. Are they really only just sending the copies of the film out to theaters around the country? Are the distributors involved in advertising the film at all? You said on Tuesday's Morning Movie News that China needs to find distribution for their planned English-language films. Why? What sort of laws or trade issues will prevent Chinese companies from doing any of this for themselves? I watch your content every day, and the last time you answered my question, it completely turned around the terrible day I was having. Keep making great videos. Dan. Well, Dan, thank you for another great question, and I hope you're not having a terrible day today. I hope this just makes your day more awesome. So, very, very interesting question. But I have to say, there's actually a little bit of misinformation here. It's incorrect that a film is produced by a studio. That is not the case. Studios do not produce films. Studios have relationships with producers. They have their in-house producing team, but that's largely still, they have outside producers who have producing shingles that they have a relationship with. They have their in-house people that they have deals with. For instance, Scott Rudin has been with Paramount for a very long time. For a while, Weinstein was with Disney through Miramax. Jerry Bruckheimer, Disney. Then also now you just have the Russo Brothers, Sony. Amy Pascal has become a producer. She will be at Sony. So you have a tiered system where you have the studio and then you have their in-house producers. And by in-house, it means that they have a production deal with the studio. So they're on the lot and the studio can count on these producers to put out content. And so what happens is that they also have producers on staff, but what those producers do at the studio is they oversee the productions that the production shingles are producing so that they can make sure that the studio is being well looked after, because they often are the ones who provide the financing. So here's an example. Let's do Amy Pascal at Sony because she just made this deal. Sony and Amy Pascal have a producing deal. They are counting on her to produce films for their slate. It's a first look deal. She comes to them, says, I want to make a movie about, let's say, XYZ. And Sony says, love it. Go ahead, greenlight. We will provide, it said it's going to cost $30 million. So they say, great, we greenlight $30 million for the XYZ movie. Go make it. And we're going to put on this individual who works for us, Steve, and Steve is going to oversee your film, Amy, to make sure you stay on budget with $30 million and that the best interests of the studio are looked out for. We're all going to powwow about who you're going to cast because, you know, we obviously have a vested interest in this film succeeding. But Amy Pascal handles largely producing the film. So that moves forward and they make the movie, all the while Sony keeping tabs on it through Steve. Then the film is ready. Then it's up to the studio. They pass the ball to the studio where they start to take charge. And they have their PR department come up with an ad campaign to promote it. They also start, let's say XYZ is an awards contender. They have their in-house Oscar team start to work on an an Oscar campaign. And they also pick a distribution date. They say, okay, we're going to distribute it in June. We feel it's a strong enough awards contender that it can be a summer release. Also, Sony has all the relationships with the different theater companies. AMC, they can pick up the phone, they're on a first-name basis, and they say, okay, we want to distribute in June. We need to book X number of theaters. Okay, we want to put our movie posters up there. We want to make sure you put our standees in the lobby. We want to have screenings. We're also going to conduct focus testing. The studio will do that so that we can decide, hey, is this movie doing well? And if there's any differences of opinion on how XYZ should proceed, maybe there's a difference in how we feel about the ending. We're going to have these focus screenings that, a test group that Sony will put together, and then we're going to look at the results, Amy and Sony and Steve, and decide what we should do about the film going forward. Then the film is released. Sony pays for all the distribution aspects of the film. They not only paid for the budget of the movie, but they're also going to pay for distributing it and also all the different prints that have to go out. It's called prints and advertising, P&A. That's not included, by the way, in a film's budget. When anybody asks how much XYZ cost, it costs $30 million. But Sony ponied up extra money, of course. Then they'll take all the money in, and then they'll have a deal for how they split those profits. They get only a percentage of the movie theater makes. Then they take in, let's say, 50%. They get their 50%. Then whatever deal they have with Amy Pascal, they give Amy her amount of money that's guaranteed to her, whatever the actors were supposed to get. They have their creative accounting going on. Steve is on salary, so he doesn't get anything. And then they take the rest and it's profit for the studio. So that's how it works when an in-house film is put together with a distributor. Now, sometimes people make films independently. That's why the festival system all works, the film festivals. What happens is you make your movie independently, you raise your money independently, and then you go into the, let's say, Sundance, and you take ABC to Sundance, and you go, okay, I've raised $5 million, I've made my movie, I hope somebody purchases it. Well, you get a lot of good reviews, you got a lot of buzz, you put together a good package in terms of your behind and front of the camera talent. So Sony Pictures Classic says, I want to distribute that movie. So they go to your screening at Sundance and they say, oh, I like it. ABC's a great movie, I think we should really get it. But you know what? A bunch of other distributors feel the same way. So they all have a bidding war, just like you saw for Beasts of No Nation. And Sony Pictures Classic goes into the room and they say, okay, well, we'll pay your $5 million back that you raised, but we'll give you maybe a $2 million profit, which your investor will get back. That's why your investor invested the $5 million in the first place. But on top of that, they also pitch, hey, we're Sony Pictures Classics. We got Foxcatcher, a bunch of nominations. We can get you on the board. We know what we're doing. We have connections. I think this year, though, considering how Sony didn't do so well with the award season, they got a lot of nominations, but not too many wins. Maybe that they wouldn't be the one who won the bidding war for ABC. But in this argument, they do. So they win the bidding war. They pay $7 million. The investor gets some money back for the $5 million, and then maybe a little bit goes to the producers who made the ABC in the first place. Then they take the film into the Sony Pictures Classics, into the studio, and the relationship begins to the point where when they finished XYZ. Test screenings, distribution, and also that ad campaign for the Oscars and for audience eyeballs. So a distributor is very important for those things that they bring to the table, and also just the relationships they also have in place. Now, China could come in here and try and set up their own distribution company, but I think that they're going to make a lot of enemies, and I think that it's going to be a long path. But they can take a shortcut by partnering with an American distributor who has a lot of relationships and say, hey, let's do this kind of split on the box office gross, on the rev share. And this is, by the way, how American films are released in China. They have a Chinese distributor because they have all the relationships over there. So they partner with usually like a Chinese financer. So that way, they have a shortcut. The Chinese film instantly goes into all the theaters. It instantly has a good advertising campaign. And everybody, and the reason that the American companies are willing to help them is because they're making money off of it. Money drives almost every decision in business for obvious reasons. And so you want to have them, give them a stake in the success of the Chinese film. So that's a little bit of a, like a 101 on how distributors work. I hope that was helpful, Dan. Thank you so much for your question. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.